know security is hard, so let's assume we're probably gonna get pwned by noon. But if we all start to get the basics right, we might not fully get pwned until tonight. Oh, hey, Joe. I didn't know you were going to be on.
Yeah, just thought I'd drop in.
Oh my gosh, so weird. Fancy seeing you here. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to Active Directory. What do we call this? Active Directory Defense 101.
101. That's at least what the toot says, or tweet. Or did you Mastodon tweet that? Or
okay, so I'm on the Mastodon. We should talk about this because I'm quite confused about what to do. I'm not the only one that feels like search is lacking a little bit, right? Because I think I can't find things, I can't find subjects, I can't find people unless I seem to know exactly what I'm looking for and how it's spelled. Is that just me, or is that the case?
It's hard getting used to it. I think, like everybody else, just kind of trying to make the transition. We'll see if it takes off. What I didn't like, not knowing anything about how Mastodon works, because seems like many people, I never really paid attention until I needed to or wanted to, or felt like maybe I should find an alternative, because I would miss all of these great folks if there wasn't an alternative. So I joined up. I guess, if I understand correctly, Jerry Bell, who had or has, I haven't listened to their podcast in a while, he's the one that hosts the information exchange instance of Mastodon all of the instances are like privately hosted. I don't know, it's all new to me. Anyways, there's been some trouble with, because so many people are joining that instance, and stability problems, and it's just a whole new world. It's kind of a, I don't know, peer-to-peer, I can't remember what they're calling it, but privately hosted instances where you join, and
but so it seems like they are all federated or connected,
so they're federated, right? So they can fediverse. Yes, I like the comments.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't see you already have chats and stuff. Yeah, hello everybody. Oh, and sorry, so I'm gonna put this up. I mean, this I feel like is a big deal. Not to brag, but I actually remembered this today without getting the reminder email. Yes, getting traction, crushing those numbers, Joe.
Yeah. I meant to ask you too, because I couldn't. I don't sign up because a lot of times I just come. But I don't know if there's a reminder system yet to put it in the calendar or put it on. So I watch the tweets or whatever else, or notifications, just oh yeah, I'm invited to that. I should remember what time it is.
Yeah, I'm not too good with that stuff. I know on Twitch and YouTube, people have been telling me, oh, I signed up for notifications or something, and they're telling me they begin to push notification right as we go live, and then they're like, oh yeah, if I can make it, I hop over. And
okay, that's how the kids do it these days. Yeah, cool.
But if I was better at marketing, I think I would do the newsletter thing, and I'd make it come out every Wednesday night or Thursday morning. But I also, it's weird, right? I can't tell you how many webinars I've missed because I just was like, oh yeah, I'm aware of that, I'll maybe put it on my calendar, and I wish I would have gotten that extra push. But yet when the vendor does do a push notification an hour beforehand, I'm like, hey, just back off. I'm an adult. I run my own calendar for a few years here.
At least two.
At least a couple, yeah. Well, let me just do this while we're getting going. I'm just going to fire up the old DC and one workstation so we can talk a little bit about Active Directory defense. And what I was telling Joe privately before we started is I made the horrible mistake of going, oh, a bunch of these lab machines need Windows updates. That shouldn't take too long.
Yeah.
And that was 2 hours ago, and the process is still happening. But I think I've got enough spinning rust to at least get a workstation and a domain controller off the ground, so we can look at kind of some of the basics here. And I thought one place that would be good to start is really the basics, because you and I were talking before we hit record. Talk a lot with different sysadmins, network admins, companies that have had domains for years, right? And they've upgraded them to different functional levels and such, and teams change over time. And I think sometimes new people get into blue team roles or sysadmin, network admin roles, and they just go, okay, cool, I got my account, I got my DA account or whatever, I'm going to start doing all my work. But I don't know if people enough like just stop and kind of raise their hand and ask the basic questions of like, for example, what's the password policy like around here? Because I mean, we've seen on some of our pen test delivery meetings where we may password spray and get an account, and so as part of the delivery report, we'll say, just FYI, right now your password policy is this. And there's been a couple drop jaws and management folks going, wait a minute, it's what now? Yeah, it's 8 characters, no complexity, and we've got 70 people here whose passwords never expire.
Yep.
And
Yep.
like, hold on, that can't be right. And then they go back and look, and they're like, well, how come nobody brought this to our attention? And that's another one of many reasons I think it's good to do pen tests and do these assessment. But I know, and I think this is going to come up so I can share my screen. Oh, beautiful. Thank you, domain controller. You're my
Wait, what's the lesson learned there, Brian? You did learn that installing updates even 2 hours before a live stream is not a great idea.
And here's the thing. I was trying to be smart because a few weeks ago, I think I was in a lab system showing a bunch of stuff. It required a reboot. And then it's like, cool, installing a huge batch of Windows updates. Luckily, that went fast, but I was trying to avoid that. And by doing so, I shot myself in the foot. So the lesson learned is just do the opposite of whatever I would do, I think. But let's see. Let me get this open. I think I'm going to get this open at the same time. Oh, I think this is just a Brian problem. But do you ever get this, Joe, where it's like, nope, I'm not going to run. However, if I dropped to a command line and type the same thing, works like a champ.
So he says, okay. I was like, did it?
And that's just I don't know. I think that could just be a me thing.
What are you trying to get running though?
I was just going to get group policy, and I was going to get the Active Directory users and computers tool open, but I was clicking it about 60 times. It wouldn't work, but if I went into command line and typed the same thing,
still booting,
still working at. Let me get into my workstation too, because that might be a little bit easier just to get those PingCastle results up. Let's see. Oh, I see. That one's got an expired password. But now,
so back to we're kind of talking a little bit about the basics, and so I think what we're hoping to do again today is take a few different live streams and conversations that Brian has had, that Brian and I have had, and kind of put them together in one stream. And so one of the great starting points I think you wanted to talk about was just looking at PingCastle as a great place to start.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just trying to get, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here where, but you know what I could do? I could just run it from the domain controller. But kids, and before Joe gets mad at me, Joe, what would you say about running?
Just don't do that at home. Well, yeah. Wait, you are at home.
Right. Are you I assume that's still best practice, isn't it, Joe? That in general, I always thought, let the domain controller do domain controllery things,
for sure.
And that's it.
Yep.
While I'm downloading and running this, I don't know if I told you this or not, but I wanted to share with the folks listening. Speaking of domain controllers, a couple of weeks ago, I don't want to say heart attack lightly because that's kind of a serious topic, right? But I had where your chest is pounding so hard that it's throbbing in your ears and you can't actually hear outside noise. I had that happen during a pen test because I got to a point where we had domain admin, and like we do many a pen test, ran our good old friend secrets dump to dump all the hashes out, right? And I know I'm not stable in the head, but when I run that secrets dump and those hashes go flying by, I kind of hear like I'm in a casino, like the major chords, ba-da-ding, that's going off in my head, and I kind of like do a little dance. And so the everything's scrolling by, and then it stops, and it's hung on like workstation $1 sign or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, maybe it just is finishing up, does that little like cleanup routine at the end. I'm like, it must just be that. And then it bombed out with some timeout error. And I was like, well, that's really weird. So let me just go up in my command history into CrackMapExec. Let me just try my DA creds against that domain again. And then it barfed up an even longer stack trace Python, the world's going to heck in a handbasket kind of thing. And that's when my heart started absolutely. Yeah. I was like, hold on. So let me queue up the CME command. Let me point it at the other domain controller. And then that came back fine and said, creds are good, pwned, it's a DA. Okay, let me do command arrow. Let's point it back at the original domain that I did secrets dump from. Big old stack trace and error. And so I thought my gut was to go like remote into the DC, but I feel like, I don't want to play sysadmin guy or help desk guy. So I was on a Teams huddle with this group of folks, and I just said, and it was a weekend too. I was like, hey, I know you said I could pen test during the weekend, but I really need you to check this domain controller.
Yeah.
And so they did check it, and they sent me a screenshot. They had, they logged into it. They said, everything looks okay. But that message came up that said, this restarted unnaturally or whatever it is. Right. Do you want to type in a reason? And so, they skipped past that. They checked authentication, checked everything. They said, yeah, ship shape. So I put an issue up on the Impacket GitHub, and I said, has anybody seen this? And somebody did write back that they said they suspected it could have been EDR actually sensing that was going on and like cut it off at the head. And I thought, well, that would be kind of amazing. And they said maybe it rebooted to sort of cleanse itself of evil. But the customer sent me event logs, and I definitely see in there was some LSAS problem that kind of made it have its poop the bed. But they did check the EDR logs, nothing in there. So it doesn't seem to be an EDR thing. All I know really besides that is that it was a Windows Server 2016 standard. And I'm doing Googling and stuff. I don't see anybody who's like, yeah, me too. I also had that. They're just, it seems to be kind of, I was hoping maybe one of the tool authors would weigh in, and maybe they will.
Did you get a chance to run it again to see if it happened again?
Dude, I was so scared. And they were so nice about it. Like they weren't worried about it at all. They're like, no, we trust you. Like, you're good. Like we know.
Yeah.
But I felt like I had to write them a dissertation of like, you need to understand, I run this every time. And this is not just me shotgunning tools around your enterprise. And they're like, it's okay. Like, you need to relax. But I was so rattled. But I actually did look. I don't know if the dump has things in order. And by that, I mean users and then machines, or if it's just all kind of in a blender. But it did seem like I got everything, and it just choked on the last few like machine hashes. But man, I'm getting sweaty just even talking about it. I really and I'll talk about it on the podcast, of course. But just to throw that out there to folks listening, and maybe if you wonder, Joe, do I get the sweats? Have I gotten the sweats every pen test since, where I've got secrets dump all queued up, and it's like click? Yeah, I definitely do. But and I think I would have felt better if I would have known, hey, it turns out EDR is like somehow, sensing this and stopping it. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Okay. So yeah, we've talked about this a little bit before. PingCastle is awesome to kind of get a baseline. Do they say, if I search for policy, I think they call out, okay, so this is nice. They call out what your password policy is, at least according to default domain policy, right? And if you go here, it's nice. They call it in red. Whoa, you don't have complexity on. Your minimum password length is 7. They call that out in red.
Did you want to share that yet? Or are you to a point where you want to be sharing?
Oh, is it not sharing? Oh,
it
my
good.
My bad. How about now? I get it. I have to share it. Then I also have to turn it on. Okay. So I just did I'm sorry. I thought folks were running it. I was like, oh, I'm doing 2 things at once. I just downloaded PingCastle from pingcastle.com just to do a quick review. Oh, that's cool. Joe and Joe.
Nope, not going to take it. Put in my real password. I swear it'll work.
Which is still winter 2022. Okay. Yeah. So I just ran it straight out of the box. I just literally ran the exe and said, give me the health check and enter for the default domain. That's all I did. And then in that same folder, if you just do a directory, it gives you this beautiful HTML file. So here we are. And all I did here, just to get on topic and look at password policies, I just searched for the word policy.
Yeah.
Found it down here. So we've got some recommendations here. And Joe, I want to put you on the spot since
Sure.
we're talking basics and passwords. Well, yesterday I had this conversation with a client about, what are the just standard best practice rules for password policy. And I feel like when people ask me that, if it was a musical, they'd cue the music and I'd put like a hat on and I'd start a whole song. It would be like, have a password that's long enough, or have a passphrase that's long enough. And then have a mechanism to prevent people from picking winter 2022s. But also, if you're going to use passphrases, this is a conversation I've had twice now.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Don't have your passphrase be like a catchphrase from Tommy Boy or a famous song title or something like that, because now in these word lists that I'm downloading to crack people's passwords against, those are starting to be in there now. So,
sure.
We've got these organizations who follow our guidance and we're like, oh, awesome. You went from 7 characters and no complexity to 15 character minimum. And you've got the safepass.me or something like that. But also I did still get a high privilege cred. And they jokingly go like, what do you want me to do, Brian? So what do you, if you had to kind of put it all in a general recommendation bucket, what would you say?
So one of the things I like to, I guess, point out is that over time, everything changes. And that especially holds true for passwords. Ultimately, I really look forward to a world where the WebAuthn and password list is the norm. But until that day, the answer to that kind of depends. So I think on the furthest end of the spectrum for what is the best password, that is, in my opinion, use a password vault and don't know the password that you're going to use. It needs to be long, strong, random. I think over time, we try and give, good advice about how to make passwords stronger. And ultimately, I think that's a futile effort. There's also the difference between being able to crack a password. And this is the other thing we talk to customers about. Just because we can crack it doesn't mean we can guess it. And the likelihood when we go on a pen test and do a password spray that we're going to spray a password that we can inevitably crack is not one and the same. So a lot of those passphrases that people may be using, other than the ones that are well known, it's really unlikely that we are going to spray them. So you also kind of have to step back and say, how is somebody going to attack this password? And so generally speaking, there is like NIST advice about what we should be doing and how often, which is good advice to point back to, when we're trying to let customers know. But I think ultimately we are going to have to keep making them longer, stronger, and more random. And that means using something like, a FIDO2 key or passwordless. We're moving in that direction. And so, generally, if I look at somebody's password policy and say 10 characters, complexity, personally, I hate complexity. I think that used to be really good back, a few years ago, 5 years ago or so. But complexity kind of burned us because, people trying to remember the complexity in their passwords actually made it where they were tending to write them down or make them the character substitutions, because humans are fairly predictable, myself included, where the complexity ends up at the end, rarely is at the beginning. Like one of the things we know from cracking passwords is like the numbers and the complexity always come at the end. And the password generators now that you can use to generate passwords to spray are really good doing that kind of stuff. So anyways, Brian, super long-winded answer to
Oh,
say
it's good.
it depends, right? And so
Yeah.
it's unique. There is not one simple answer. But the other thing that kind of tails into that is use fine-grained password policies and make your password complexity appropriate to the risk of the account. And so fine-grained password policies in AD are essentially applied at the OU level, where you can say, look, domain admins and administrators and privileged accounts, they need to have a different password policy from the standard domain password policy. And
And is that
so
all? And I don't want to put you on the spot. Is that all within here? Is that group? Are you doing a group policy to do
it
that,
is a
or is
group
that within?
policy. Yep. And essentially you
Okay.
apply a fine-grained password group policy to a particular OU.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
so you can say for this group, 25 characters. So for instance, service accounts, if you want to prevent service accounts from ever having a 10-character password, then set a fine-grained password policy for the OU where all the service accounts live and make sure they have 25 to 30 characters. And, they should be generated from a vault, but at the very minimum, their password is going to be long. And that applies specifically to Kerberoasting, which is something that we are more likely to crack a Kerberoastable account than password spray a passphrase. So hopefully that makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Like
Yeah.
with any account that we can Kerberoast, if it only has a relatively short and weak password, we can crack that offline. That's different than us being able to password spray an account that has a passphrase. It's unlikely we are going to password spray a passphrase. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. That's an important distinction that I think I probably need to do a better job of clarifying when we get to that part of the report where we got DA, we acted like bad people, we took out all the hashes and tried to crack them. And yeah, like you said, there's some really on paper dynamite passwords or dynamite password phrases, as in really solid, really strong. But then the maybe the more technical folks in the room are like, I get it, I understand this is an offline crack, but then management is kind of like, whoa, like we're using passphrase generators and stuff, and you still got
Yeah.
us. And then you kind of have to get into this whole, well, no, for me to guess, some Tommy Boy catchphrase plus 4 characters, right? Like that's going to take me so long if I'm in the environment, spraying with that, and you would have account lockout policies and stuff that would slow me way down and wouldn't
Yeah,
make it
exactly.
worth my time to go after this. I mean, I guess if you get a network and that's the only skill you have is password guessing and spraying, I suppose you would just keep at it, for a few years. But yeah, like you said, just because we cracked it with our cracker offline does not automatically mean, oh my gosh, these are garbage. You need to make your policy even stronger for passwords.
Yeah, and also think what you're protecting against, right? We have to apply this, for lack of better words, risk-based approach where we realize what we're protecting against. So if you want to protect against password cracking, that's a different use case than protecting against someone password spraying, especially when you talk about SSO and using like Microsoft 365. What protections are, when you have cloud-based and Office 365, your password spraying is going to be a different use case, right? The resistance of that password probably needs to be stronger than portals that aren't publicly facing to the web. So internal password spraying versus external password spraying and the controls you put around those, you have to just know what you're trying to protect and the likelihood that it's going to be attacked or where the attack is coming from.
Gotcha. Okay, so from domain password perspective, sounds like the general consensus is, longer, not necessarily complex, but right, longer passwords, longer passphrases, and having some mechanism, whether that be the Azure or the whatever they call it these days, they maintain a password list. I don't think they give a lot of insight into what they're using, but I would kind of assume it's pwned to passwords plus some of
I
their
think
own
they did
sauce.
basically say, yeah,
Did
that
they?
we took the pwn password list and then we add again some of our own passwords, kind of mush those together. I would say, once again, the only downside to that is that protection only comes into play when you're using Azure AD as the
Oh,
password
right.
changing, or enforcement, which is kind of a bummer. That's why you and I have always kind of recommended in the last few years SafePass.me, because it is a paid add-on, but it's something that is enforced both at the Active Directory level as well as the Azure level. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Gotcha. Okay. Then since we're talking about passwords, let's talk about another thorn in our side, which is what we see on a pen test a lot is, maybe the domain policy password requirements are totally rad and totally tight, but here's a common scenario for us. Start a pen test. Our test account is part of domain users, and
Yep.
domain users, just by the way things are set up, have local admin to even one box, let's say, just a single workstation, right? If we're an attacker or we're on our pen test, right, one of the first things we're going to do is dump out. We're going to dump out credentials from that box, and just for fun, since we're here having a good time, let's see if I can do this in any reasonable amount of time, just because I always think this is fun to look at if you've not seen it. I got the brand. Did you get the new? And I've lost my terminal. Did you get the shiny new CME?
Yeah, for sure.
Just from a couple days ago. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, there it is. So I'm going to see. So I'm going to do. In fact, let's just use our poorly configured domain as an example here. This is definitely something we have seen in a pen test. Let's look at some of the. Let's see. This being anomalies. We've got a password somewhere in the GPO hierarchy. And down here, we've identified there's a GPO here that pushes out a local admin cred to all of the workstations.
What a strange password.
Isn't that weird? It's almost like the admins made it too personal. I think I've got CME. Let's see, where's my CME? Oh, the CME Ubu. I think this is the new one. Let me just check real quick. It's got a cool name. The old one was coins, and this one is like indestructible.
Right. Yeah.
Gothmog. I don't know what a Gothmog is.
It probably means something to somebody, because I was like, I wonder what that means. It must mean obviously means something to them, but
yeah. But what I'll do here is I'll just spray the whole subnet here with those creds. So I'll do BF admin. I'll do password of that, and that's a local password, so I'll specify local auth, and I think that will do it.
So this is kind of a good point also. With the default Kali instance, you're going to get CrackMapExec. I think we are at a point where even just system admins should be doing stuff like this, because it's point and shoot. Like, spin up a Kali instance, grab this command that's well published in CME, and take a few passwords, because I think on a lot of assessments, you and I have found that people will have an old password and they will swear up and down after we found it, this doesn't exist in the environment anymore. I don't know how this happened. How did this happen? Test yourself. Like this, I know it's this, to some people who have never done it, it seems like magic, but that command is documented all over the place. Like, just a default Kali instance, spin it up, run that command that Brian ran right there with a password that you think has disappeared from your environment. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to find it somewhere. You'd be like, how is that still, like, my password, like Laps didn't rotate the password on that machine, or we totally forgot about it. Assessment after assessment after assessment, we get these, we thought that was gone. That's 10 years ago.
Yes, that was this 4 sysadmins ago. That was that guy's password. He was the skydiving guy. And it's like, well, it's still out there. And yes, to your point, exactly. It's not, I mean, with the default Kali, you get CrackMapExec out of the box. You don't need to, I mean, you really don't need to know, even if you're scared of Linux. I wouldn't say you need to know how to do much except drop to the terminal and follow the wiki. And you can do this for all your subnets. I don't know. One thing I want to find out, I don't know if you could, I would really like to be able to feed CrackMapExec a list of subnets like you can with Nmap. So then you could just, hit all 8 subnets, right? Just blast through all of
I
them.
swear
There's
that is in
probably
it.
is. There
Yeah.
probably is. But yeah, so we'll find this on a pen test, and then we will do. Well, we actually kind of already illustrated it, right? Like we knew this password, but if we just had local admin on a box, we could just pick one of these. For example, I'll pick desktop 10. And if our let's just say this was our testing account, if we had local admin on it, we could just say tac Sam, dump out all the local creds from the box, and then immediately start shotgunning these hashes around the network. And more often than not, right, we're local admin everywhere, right? So I know there's lots of commercial tools that'll, because it gets. And I don't know if you've got experience with some of these. I know some customers have said, "Well, I hear about different PAM solutions and stuff that claim to help me manage domain account credentials and kind of checking them in and out, but they also claim to have a local administrator password management like functionality." But then you were telling me too that traditional just Microsoft laps, just from Microsoft, you said that's getting a little bit of a facelift. So what have you heard about that? Because this is my go-to because it's free and it's from Microsoft, and we've been over on this stream how to install it, and really it doesn't take much. It's a little learning curve, but once it's set, it's good to go. Where do you sit on all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of looking back, like you said, or stepping back and talking about laps and other PAM solutions rotate the local administrator password and make them random on every host and store them in Active Directory. And if configured properly, which is fairly straightforward to do, only those people who need access to that account via the ACLs will have access to that account in Active Directory so they can use it to log in locally. So, but one of the things that I've seen on quite a few pen tests is that sometimes there's the group policy like Brian just showed. The other thing that happens a lot is laps will rotate only a single password that you choose. So you can either create a new non-SID 500 account, or you can use the built-in account, enable it, and rotate the password, right? So going back in time, people will have had like 4 local admin accounts, and that's why we run across those who have a, an admin account that had a different name, kind of like the one you displayed, the PT admin or whatever else. They will have had one of those that's older. You have to tell it then, we'll get rid of all the rest of the accounts so that there's not old accounts laying around. And some of the PAM solutions will do that, some of them won't. But that is one of those things where people are like, well, we started using and rotating the password, but we didn't know to take those other accounts out, that even an individual who had local admin privileges before laps created their own local admin passwords. So you have to remove all of those other accounts. And there's abilities to do that. But, since we've talked about laps quite a bit, all I wanted to mention on that front is that there is a new version coming out. And I would say most of the advanced features that have been found in things like Thycotic Secret Server and some of the other privileged identity management tools are now being built into Labs. So there's some great features coming out. It is now built into Windows 11 in the preview release. So there's no longer a requirement to actually install Labs on Windows 11 with the future release that's supposed to be out soon. So that's great. Some of the other features, and Brian, I see that you posted them, because right now it's really just a description of what is coming. So some of the great new features are, today you can only back up passwords to Active Directory. So they're adding Azure AD. So you do have to choose whether you want passwords to be stored in Azure AD or AD. Directory service restore mode, which we every now and again probably talk about the DSRM password. But that password is often, so the time that you set that password is when you do a domain, the first time a member server gets made a domain controller, the local admin account that was set on that member server now becomes the default domain DSRM password. And so you have the opportunity to change it, but we find quite a few times people forget about that password and they don't change it. And when you run something like CrackMapExec against the domain controller, remember this happened? I can't remember how long ago. We're like, what is that?
Oh,
That's that.
yeah.
It's like administrator. And you're like, but administrator doesn't exist anymore because it's a domain controller. Well, it does. It just becomes the directory services restore mode or recovery mode password. And oftentimes we find it's the oldest password in the domain. It's the first one you set. And if you set it terrible and didn't update it through iterations of domain functional level, then
Yeah.
it's super old password as well. Okay, so I talked a
Uh,
lot right there, so I'm gonna let that soak in a bit. But the
yeah.
point of I kind of diverged in. If you look back at just Active Directory 101 basics, these are the things that we find over and over that people jump over because they want to get the fancy new EDR. But we find this kind of stuff more often than not still. So that's why we continue to talk about these topics like this, because we see them on almost every pen test. Sometimes
Yeah.
they're variations on this. But anyways, Laps being built in also has some cool new features coming that are in those paid products that I mentioned earlier. So one of the things is change password on use. That's an awesome feature, right? So imagine if you are using Laps to generate a secure password on your workstations for that local admin account. What I've seen over and over again, and Brian has found, both of us have found passwords on desktops and in shares. So
Mm,
because that password is so complex, what we see administrators doing over and over, they copy the password out of AD, or they run a PowerShell to retrieve the password from AD, and they paste that password in a notepad on their desktop while
yeah.
they're working on a computer, and then they forget. And by
Yes.
default, Laps is set up to rotate the passwords based on a frequency, not based on use. Well, all that will change when this new release goes GA. So you can tell Laps, whenever I use that password and I log out,
Oh.
immediately rotate that password to something else.
Oh,
So
that's so
for my
cool.
session, while I'm interactive, I'm going to be able to use that same password. I log out, boom, the password rotates. That is a phenomenal feature. There's
Oh, that's
a
awesome.
another feature that is password history. So, and this is a problem I've run into, and it doesn't happen very often, but let's say you back up a computer image, um, and you need to get back into that computer image that you restore. The password has been rotated 3 times. Currently, Laps doesn't keep a history. So if you've restored a image of a computer that is 6 months old, you have to get that Laps password from that period when that
Right.
password was active. Laps
Right.
didn't have a history, and you'd be out of luck. And so you'd have to recover that password or use some USB related program to reset that password. And so now built in is going to be a password history that you can see all of the previous passwords and based on when they were rotated. There's lots of other cool features coming, but most of the complaints, one of the things I'll mention is like encryption. So you're going to have the ability to also encrypt the passwords in AD. So that's kind of a two-layer protection.
Hmm.
So the two-layer protection would be if your ACL is configured incorrectly to allow people to have access to the password, it's still encrypted. And so if they escaped, so to speak, they should also be encrypted at the same time. Now, I don't know that everybody's going to use that feature, but it is one of those features that has been requested quite a bit to be in Laps to make it compete with those paid products. And so far, again, this is a free solution. The other thing that I wanted to point out is as people move more and more to hybrid joined domain between Azure AD and on-prem, the way that I see this going is over time, Microsoft is going to move away from on-prem domain controllers, and everything is going to be Azure AD joined. They're going to force you into that in the future. It's a ways down the road, but when you see tools like Labs have the ability to store passwords in Azure AD, you can just tell that the future in their minds is on-prem domain controllers will go away. What I struggled with in that concept a long time ago, and I don't want to veer too far off, is that my question was, well, how are you going to manage GPOs in Azure AD, because Azure AD does not support GPOs? At Ignite, they really started talking up that Intune is going to be their answer, and you will have conditional policies that apply from Intune that can apply very similar features to GPOs. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you what we're seeing right now is organizations are hybrid joining devices, and Microsoft's desire is to move away from Active Directory on-prem and all of its quote unquote problems. So all of these things we're talking about today, they're trying to fix in Azure AD, and they're saying that we can't fix some of these legacy things. We're going to more and more try and fix them in Azure AD. Who knows if they're right? I'm just throwing that out there. This is where it looks like Microsoft is going, and that's why their new tools are really geared towards things like Intune, Azure AD. The feature parity is what they're really focusing on. Once they have feature parity across tools, they will really try and force people more and more into Azure AD. So there you go.
Good stuff. Well, I'm excited. Well, once it hits, we can actually play with it. We'll have to just tinker with it on one of our Thursday things and just
for sure.
just kick it around. That sounds amazing. That's what I remember whenever I'm at a security conference and talk about Labs. Still, even today, a lot of people are like, "What?" I'll say, "Raise your hand if you've heard of it." I have more hands go up these days, but still, there'll be a handful of people never heard of it, and then you show it and you describe the security benefits, and their minds are blown, and they're like, "Why is this not just built into the operating system?" Well, it sounds like
they finally heard that message.
Maybe those cries were heard.
I mean, it's 10 years old or something. I think it's 10 years old, and so
okay. Well, that's cool. We'll have to keep an eye on that. I didn't want to take us too far down a tangent, but when you brought up, hey, it's awesome if the more you can kind of self audit your own environment, even if it is with tools that by nature are offensive,
hacker
like
tools,
CrackMapExec, just because it's not technically an Active Directory 101 defense, but it is something that we're finding wins more and more and more on. I would highly recommend, and you can use CrackMapExec for this, is do a self audit on your SMB shares, because I feel like there's another area where you can forget, you set up some share on some server with wide open permissions just because temporarily you were going to dump a backup of a system there, right? And then move it to the SAN, and then you were going to shut down that share, but you forgot. And that's one of the first things we look for, and we find all sorts of goodies.
And sometimes one of the last things we look for when we're desperate, right? And we're like, oh, why did we look for that first?
Yes. Oh, exactly. And just to add more relation to that story, I think it was just last night or the night before, I was pinging you going, man, I was on this pen test where things are really well buttoned up. Like, I was protocol poisoning, I was man in the middle sixing, I was looking deep through Sharp on Bloodhound. Everything looked really good, but I did, and let me just show, because I'm trying more and more to do more things right in CrackMapExec, because I feel like it can do so many things that I've been piecemealing with 5 or 6 other tools and kind of bringing them together.
They just keep adding so many features. It's ridiculous almost. It is literally the Swiss Army knife of pen testing now. So
yeah, and I'm sure here's another place where you could probably feed it a list of subnets, but I'm gonna just give it. Well, don't tell anybody this, Joe, but this is the domain admin password. Okay, yeah. Everybody on the thing, just turn away for about the next few seconds, and then I think it might just be shares. Is that it? Okay, that's it. Yeah. Yep. So this maybe isn't the prettiest input in the world, but at least it gives you a list of every system, the shares and the permissions on it. And so just to continue what I was saying, I did this with CrackMapExec and just started, opening up the UNC paths to all these places and doing a deep dive. It's funny. It was exactly the situation you described where you kind of figure they temporarily copied a very complex password into a notepad and then saved it or forgot to clean up after it. And it was this monstrosity. I mean, I thought it was just, I think I counted, I think I told you it was 40 characters or 35 to 40 characters. And I was like, that's odd. I mean, and I think it was just called like, some arbitrary name.txt, but it looked just crazy enough to work. So actually what I ended up doing, I guess I don't have Rubeus on here, but I just loaded up Rubeus and I said, spray this garbage string over all the entire domain. And we found a DA cred that way. So, it's one of those things. I don't know. I'm sure tools like Netrix and maybe some of these others could actually crawl into these and have filters to comb for PII and credit card and maybe things that look like passwords. But I think at least at a high level glance, you could do this scan and you could see if something stood out that was weird, right? Like, images or backups. And then, you see maybe read write or something like that, just to at least find perhaps a bleeding wound somewhere of sensitive information, right?
Yeah, and let me just reiterate the reason why we're talking about these things, and especially related to Active Directory Security 101, is all of these things are stuff we see all the time. There is no fancy EDR in the world that's going to stop you from crawling a share that you have access to and a password that, you know what I mean? There's no protection that a fancy EDR or other security system is going to provide you that's going to stop this kind of stuff. So when we talk to people and they're like, but we have crowd secure, and you're like, that's great, but you have the password in an open share.
Yeah, they're kind of mad that the very expensive EDR didn't catch this,
right?
We did it, right? Yeah.
And obviously, I know it's not crowd secure, but
yeah. And I'm just trying to think. I can't think of. I was just going to. It's weird. I got in with a password here, but it said it was expired when I tried to remote into it with a desktop. So I guess I just needed to reset it to the same thing.
Right.
I was just going to show real quick. We have shown this in the stream before, but just another thing, like you said, figuring out, that old password that Joe the admin loved 5 years ago, we're not using that on any of our domain accounts, right? You can find out super quick with our good friend Rubeus, and just do a spray of password, Joe rules, and save the out file of joerules.txt, right? That easy. Download an exe.
Reason to use Rubeus as opposed to CME, which can also password spray, is what, Brian?
Well, and maybe I could be behind the times. Maybe CME is good to maybe I can just feed it a password and it'll go nuts. But back in the day when I was password spraying with CrackMapExec, I had to figure out through PowerShell or other means how to extract a list of the users and then hit them. But our good friend Rubeus is smart enough to just build that list and just bang away, and also skip anybody who's disabled. Or I think even like isn't it smart enough to look and see if you're about to lock out an account? I thought somebody told me it reads the whatever attribute that is of if you've been pounding away at an account and this is going to be the one that locks it out. I want to say it can do that too. But again, that's a super great way to audit your own stuff. Then you're not waiting for next month's or next year's pen test. You're just cleaning house, and you're taking that low hanging fruit stuff out, because we've talked about too, right? Like we try to be different in our methodology. Whereas if we walk in the door and 10 minutes later we find winter 2022 is a DA account, we're not going to be like, there we go, all done. They paid top dollar for this, and
right.
we did what we came to do. We'll move on to other things, but you and I both know there's plenty of other consultancies out there that will just be like DA and done. And really it's like, okay, make the recommendation. They need to do some account cleanup, but it's like, move on with the hours and the money they're giving you to look for other stuff. Like load them up with more of this low hanging fruit, so that even if coming out of the pen test is like, you got 20 just basic housekeeping things to do, that's awesome. Cause a lot of people aren't doing the basics. So you've made them like colossally more secure, and it was still a worthwhile pen test. I feel like some customers are almost like, oh, I wanted to make it hard for you. And it's like, well, who cares about our feelings? Like, we're here to help you. I mean, it certainly does get the blood pumping, right? When you bring down a domain controller or you have a really hard test. But I don't at all feel like, oh, well, they shouldn't have had a pen test because they're in such bad shape. It's like, no, the opposite. You had some stuff that if a bad guy or bad gal was on your network, you would have been seriously owned in about 4 minutes. And now follow our remediation and you'll be, in much better shape than you were, 10 minutes ago. So
yeah. And the other thing we hear is like everybody pins their hopes on, EDRs, and if they don't have the budget for it, they may not do anything. And again, our advice is always, there's a whole bunch of things you can do to really dramatically improve your security and reduce your risk that only involve your time and some amount of effort. And oftentimes these things take more time even than implementing the EDR, because it's an effort-based thing. So like people are scared of rotating the local admin passwords. You got to build up to that. And it may take you 3 months to get comfortable with that concept, doing, small groups of computers at a time, installing the MSI and fine-grained password policies. You don't, most people aren't comfortable just applying that across the board. So it's these things you have to build up over time. So have this backlog of these 80 things that we see every day, because the other reason we talk about these is that we also try and mimic what commodity ransomware groups are doing, right? And so if they've made it past your perimeter defenses and land on a machine, this is exactly what they're going to do, because it's a path of least resistance. And they will take the path of least resistance to ransom your environment, to exfil data out of your environment. That's not FUD. That is, we see this from many, many documented sources. You have to separate them into, the APT groups that most people are not defending against APT groups on a day-to-day basis. They are defending against ransomware groups and ransomware as a service. And this is the stuff they do. AD Find, PingCastle, Bloodhound, things like that. They're doing that exact same thing. And it's well documented in tons and tons of sources about how they move laterally. And this is it. I mean, it's not, fancy EDRs and SIMs and all of those things help detect it. But these things are just really straightforward and simple, simple in the fact that they are doable by most anybody who has, the ability and the time. They're not really complex. They're more time consuming than anything.
Yeah. And I think some clients are almost a little bit disappointed when they see the report and they're looking at the screenshots and the links to tools and they're like, so you guys don't have like your own, custom exploits and this and that. And to your point, it's like, there are groups out there doing that for sure. Right. But it's like, not to be insensitive, but we definitely didn't need to. We didn't need anything special. We need the off the shelf GitHub, tried and true repos. But I try to turn that into a positive, right? It's like you can use those same things to find low hanging fruit. And I know we only have a couple minutes, but because you and I have been talking about it lately a lot, the last thing, and yes, related to Active Directory security that we keep getting wins on over and over and over and over again is the Active Directory certificate services.
Yeah, for sure.
So while we're here, I'm going to go into, let's see, I'm going to go into, I downloaded the Sharp collection, which we've mentioned a couple of times in the program, but let me just pull it up and grab the link. This is a collection of tools that have been pre-built into EXEs for you. Now, of course, Joe, what is a general rule? People should audit every piece of code that runs on their own machine. But if you can't, But if you can't, right, you've got to
Then
be, is that kind of where you land? Not to tangent us too much, but
yeah.
you have to put your trust into someone or some company when you run code on a machine, right?
And
And
assume that there's, smarter people than me looking at the source code. These are compiled from the Git repos. And so, if you're not a .NET developer and you don't know how to compile this, even though, I'm sure there's easy places to do it. We do compile code from time to time, but these are just pre-compiled straight from the Git repos. So
what I was going to recommend from this, well, you can either get the source, build it yourself, but Sharp Collection has this Certify EXE, which I'll drop a link to as well. That's from that's from the folks at SpectraOps, I believe, right? They kind of are involved in all these
yeah,
these tools. But I think it is just, I might have to look at the wiki. I think it's just Certify, Find, or maybe it's Find. Let me see. Oh, we'll try it. I think it's Find Vulnerable are the keywords, but I don't know if maybe it's Find / Vulnerable, or maybe it's just.
your memory is better than mine, so I rely upon you.
Not too bad. I've been telling any client that will listen, and this has been real eye opening for some clients that didn't even know they had this. I even in scoping calls sometimes, they'll say like, "Hey, kind of give us a leg up. Like, what are some of the things you're going to be looking for?" And I'm fine telling them. It's like this, that. A client recently was like, Active Directory, what? I said, oh, certificate services. We talked about what it was. They're like, oh, don't need to worry about it. We have that.
We don't have
that. And then what do they have? They had it. And if you look, right here, it'll tell you, here's where you've got some vulnerabilities. They had, this one where you've got a template that allows enrollee to supply subject. So in other words, me with my pen test account, I can enroll on behalf of Joe, the domain admin, and this service is none the wiser and goes, oh yeah, cool. Here you go.
Yep.
You can now impersonate Joe, the domain admin. And again, like you said, your EDR isn't going to catch that. I've not even seen, I don't want to speak for all SIM and SOC services, but I've never been like caught doing this. I think because it probably looks like just legit. It's not like I'm exploiting a weak service or software, right? I mean, I'm using the
it falls
certificate
into the
as intended,
misconfiguration,
right?
as opposed to exploiting a vulnerability. So
yeah.
And going back in time too, we've even had customers who are like, wait, hey, you didn't point that out last year. And we have to continually remind people that this research is all relatively new. Again, just like the attackers, as some vulnerabilities and misconfigurations become more prominent and they get fixed, then people do more research into other areas. So there's always new avenues. And that's why we try and bring these new avenues forward on our tests, is like, this is what people are finding to exploit now. And, I don't think this will ever end, at least in my lifetime, of new areas, because we continue to explode in the amount of software and services that we bring into environments. So,
yeah. Well, I think that's good. We kind of talked about passwords, auditing your own local and domain passwords. Talked about a couple of different ways to audit your SMB shares. Let me just drop one more link here. My favorite actually right now, for just getting a hold of what shares are out there and their permissions. I think this one's the way to go. No dig on CrackMapExec. I love me some CrackMapExec, but this prints out a prettier HTML report and CSV that I think will give you more of an actionable list.
and you know how I look at this too, Brian, is that CME is basically low hanging fruit. PowerHuntShares is really digging, in the weeds a little bit to find more interesting stuff that may not be obvious to you across a greater swath. So they both have similar goals, but in the end, PowerHuntShells, when you're really digging for gold, so to speak, PowerHuntShells is just, it's incredible, the layers that it can dig into in the permission. So it's much more of an audit tool as well. So any organization can just run that. And it prints out pretty and beautiful reports that are in a format that you can give to people or use yourself as well. They're just incredible.
Yes. And I know we're kind of getting over time, but let me just say one more thing, just because you reminded me exactly of another reminder of how important it is to get a hold of your SMB shares. We were on a pen test where we saw what looked to be an imaging software service, and some shares that couldn't get full permissions into, but it looked like somewhere in there were like the base OS image that the organization would deploy to their workstations.
Right.
So in our little ESXi box, we spun up a kind of a shell VM set to network boot or Pixie boot, right? Fired that thing up. It happily went, oh, let me check if there's an imaging deployment service out there. Oh, there is? Cool. The deployment screen comes up. It downloads that image to our shell VM, right? And then the minute that was booted, we powered it down and mounted it like a disk, and then ripped out the registry hives, used secrets dump to dump out the local credentials, right? Local usernames and hashes, sprayed those all over the place. And I mean, not only was it a fast local admin, but I mean, there was no detections for it. And this was like a kind of a hair trigger, very heavily watched environment.
Right.
But we were able to sneak under the radar. So I say all that to say there's another big use case for using something like Laps, because Laps would have stopped me from taking one local cred and owning the whole enterprise. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay.
All right. Oh, let me just check real quick. There were some chats coming in, and I'm sorry, I get kind of ADHD, so I didn't see if there was any questions here.
So there was one going back in time, just kind of starting at the top. UAC prompts are annoying with password vaults. Wish there was a solution for that.
Oh, interesting. I don't know that I mean, I'm thinking like 1Password, LastPass. I don't know if Dude Man, maybe if you're still on, you could clarify.
Clarify that.
I'm not sure if I know what that means. Also, Hatter 2047 said certificates are bust. I know we could probably just easily segue into something else, but I know a couple conversations with customers recently, they've asked the question, especially after a pen test, should we be doing something else? Should we be doing hardware, cards, and tokens and all that? I'm not really well versed in that. I know that's kind of the, if you could wave a magic wand, we would have hardware authentication and everything. But I also know it can be a pretty expensive to do card-based auth and have it at everybody's workstation. Are you any take on that, or do you think the industry will get there, or are we a ways out from?
I would also say go back and look at some of this stuff first. And so, we've seen a lot of times when we're so far over time, but we've seen a lot of times where people have two-factor on RDP. And Brian just showed you in the background with SMB, and this has been tweeted out a lot recently as well, that, hey, RDP was blocked, so I just used SMB. And it's like, yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? There are some limitations to those things, and we can talk about using Authlight or other things that kind of stop all of the authentication pieces with a FIDO-like device. That is a more mature thing. If you still have open shares and passwords, a lot of times those things are not going to be able to stop all authentication. So take care of the low-hanging fruit in this 101 series first.
Okay, good. That's what I usually say is the de facto response when a client asks that is, should we jump right to some Cadillac solution? And I usually say, why don't we wait? Look at all this great stuff you can fix for free, in your environment. Let's start with that, and then we'll, let's talk about hardware auth and all this other stuff later. But well, thanks a lot, Joe. I really appreciate it. Any closing thoughts? Any words of wisdom? Hope you have a good Thanksgiving. All that good stuff. And I was just going to show you just a quick end on the game. Do you have any idea where I'm going right after this?
I have no idea, Brian. Let's see. Your password was something related to like indoor skydiving or something like that. And it's possible your domain has something to do with indoor skydiving. And I did randomly hear you say something about your next flight. And that's the first time I've heard you actually refer to skydiving as a flight. I'm going to
like
be late for my flight, I think you said on the podcast or something
yes,
like
it's like the
so.
dumbest dad joke ever, right? But guess what? My dad, who is a pilot, thinks it is the funniest thing when I call him and I'm like, "Hey, I'll call you later, man. I gotta go. I gotta catch my flight." And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Oh, the skydiving." And he's just, "Oh, my pancreas." He's just belly laughing. So he and I are in good humor. But
Good,
as you
good.
might guess, my wife just rolls her eyes, as do my kids.
Right.
But that is where I have to go. I appreciate you joining. Appreciate all of
Yeah.
you who came and said hi and asked questions and comments. That was awesome. And we'll see you all next time.